we'll really be unpacking what is the condition of democracy in Namibia, right? We're trying to also understand the relationship between civic engagement and democracy with a specific focus on digital democracy and the implications of a lack of digital tools on young people who don't have those tools, right? So what are the implications of these differences? What does democracy look like? Does it look a certain way? And just how are we going about strengthening democracy as it relates to young people right now in Namibia? So our very first question is going to be directed to Nonge. So Nonge, you are, the youth advocate of the Trade Union Congress of Namibia. So in that position, there's an assumption that you understand with the work that you do, the power of unions, the power in numbers. So if you could just speak to us a little bit about what is the extent of the value that is found in social networks as it relates to digital democracy and youth civic engagement, the benefit of unions in manifesting the democratic process.
Thank you, Bertha. Well, firstly, as a youth advocate under our National Trade Union Congress, I would have to explain the value and the true definition of what the Trade Union Congress is. Firstly, it is an umbrella body governing all the different trade unions across our country, meaning those working in the teachers' unions, those working in labor, those working in different areas of our workforce are all governed by our National Trade Union Congress. So firstly, it operates as a representative body. But most importantly, it operates as a representative leg in a tripartite structure, along with the government and along with the employer structure, all governed under the International Labour Organization. Now, the International Labour Organization is the only UN agency that has a tripartite structure. So, particularly related to democracy, this allows for every single Namibian who is employed in any sphere, be it formal or informal, in any structure, to be able to relay their issues and to be able to advance their issues all the way up to the International Labour Organization. So we have that check and balances system that allows for a true democratic relaying of Namibian workers' voices. Now, for young people especially, this is so relevant for us because, as we know, it is the trade union that has advanced labor issues not only for young people, but for many Namibians throughout the years. From our colonial liberational struggle, up until now, we were facing modern issues of harassment in the workplace, violence in the workplace. These are all issues that have been democratically relayed by the voices of young people in Namibia. Starting from the late 1970s, late 1980s, we have seen a transformation in our workplaces because young people have taken the stand and decided that through democracy, we're going to advance our country. So I'm quite proud to be associated with the National Trade Union Congress.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nonge. And I'm glad you bring up the tripartite structure, and this really speaks to the presence of bureaucracy, administrative legislation, and that leads into our next question, which is to Wayne. And Wayne, you're a candidate attorney, right? So just with your personal experience with the law, how do we use the law as a tool to enhance young people's civic engagement? So is there some kind of nuance that you have as a young person who's familiar with legislation that might not be apparent to other young people and might make you more attentive to nuance in terms of achieving change through democracy?
Thank you, Bertha. I think as a young lawyer and obviously as an aspiring legal practitioner, it's important to understand that the basis of our democracy is our constitution, right? We live in a dispensation where Namibia is now founded upon constitutional democracy, so we moved away from parliamentary sovereignty to this political theory and a system in place before independence. So now constitutional democracy governs us. The black text and letter of our constitution is the basis of our democracy. But within that, we can say that it's also woven in with elements of representative democracy, which is also one of the accounts of contemporary accounts of democracy. As a concept now very archaic, and you can even argue, as some theorists argue, that it's become obsolete. But direct democracy is really handy in terms of allowing the citizen, the ordinary citizen, to have a direct influence upon how society is governed. Now, that being a concept considered very archaic, I think constitutional democracy is, for it to survive where we are in the digital age, I think digital democracy then becomes an absolutely important discourse alongside participatory democracy, so as to keep democracy alive in the digital era. And we all know that as young people, our engagement with the law is dead unless you make it come alive. So our engagement with the law is limited at the moment. For the law to speak to us as young people, we need to make it come alive. And one of the ways that we can do that is to digitize how the law speaks to us, how the law speaks to our contemporary norms, our contemporary values, how the law speaks to our governing democratic systems and institutions. And I think we need to develop systems as young people where we take the law on digital platforms, where we engage with the law for the law to stay alive and for the law to promote democracy. And I think with the apps and applications that we have, that is not too far off. I think practically speaking, mere engagements on Twitter and Instagram can go a long way. And that obviously puts an onus to some of us that know some of these nuances in terms of the law and sometimes in terms of the Constitution and Acts of Parliament to actually lead these discussions. Because the ordinary citizen on the screen does not have these tools to effectively engage and therefore does not know what democracy as a concept entails and what democracy practically looks like. So these are the conversations that we as young legal scholars have to drive in this country.
Thank you, Wayne. So when we're talking about participatory democracy and the law coming alive to different young people, I'm thinking about the differences that exist among young people in terms of the access that they have to different digital tools. And that brings me to my question to you, William, which is, as a NAST branch chairperson, how do you factor that difference of access and resources in your service to your constituents as it relates to youth civic engagement?
Firstly, we as NANSO face many socioeconomic barriers, not just from the university side, but let's take the country as a whole. We as NANSO, we have constituents in rural areas who do not have the means to communicate and to reach out and to actively participate. And however, our National Executive Committee has made it a priority for us to engage and to reach out to these constituents who cannot participate. Recently, the NANSO's Vice President, Comrade Luciano Kampala, led a delegation to rural areas in the Kunene, Oshana, Ohangwena, and Ochitonchuka regions. This visit was to basically go to see, to analyze, to understand what's happening on the ground, and to maintain the link between the organization and the constituents in rural areas. And now moving back to my jurisdiction, which is NAST. My team and I, the BEC, which is the Branch Executive Committee, has also made it its top priority to engage the students, whether it's via social media or it's physically on the ground, to just maintain the engagement and to promote civic engagement as well, civic participation. And for us to understand what they face so that we, as student leaders, can intervene and push the agenda.
Awesome. Thank you, William. So I think when we talk about pushing the agenda, that really leads me to ask about what the priorities of democracy should be, what should be at the forefront when we talk about youth civic engagement. And that leads me to my question to Loide, actually. So Loide, you are a youth and human rights activist. And we're talking with Loide in the lobby, and I think this might be the most delicate question, but I think it's important, and I think Loide can handle it. So Loide, what does democracy mean to you within the context of human rights, and specifically within the context of Namibia right now? So Prime Minister of International Relations, Honorable Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah said, quote unquote, SWAPO will be here to stay today, tomorrow, and forever. So just to that effect, Loide, what do you think the priority of democracy should be? Is it to ensure the continuity of a particular party because we are a politically free country, or is it to ensure the livelihoods of people? Is it both, or are those two mutually exclusive?
Thank you, Bertha. I would like to start off with the notion of activism. seeing that I'm sitting among a lot of activists here. Most youth, people also need to understand that the primary drive for civic participation is need. And this occurs when there's a gap that people in society identify. So, coming to you, Bertha, now, your question. When there's a need or a gap in society, this is about pushing the livelihoods and sustainability of people in society. They see that there's change that needs to occur that the people in the government have not maybe focused on or touched on. And most political parties, regardless of which political party it is, see this as a basis for which they can push in order to gain support now. And yes, I would like to say they coexist because parties use this to their advantage in order to gain supporters, and people within community that now see that there's a lack in government also try to participate by now creating NGOs, basically civic participation. So they coexist. Related to what the Prime Minister said, whether people will come and go and the political party will still remain, just shows that there's a strong stance and lag on the social status of what do I want to say? There's a lack on the current, just give me a moment. There's a lack of advocacy of what the people in society on the ground want and what the political parties are advocating for. So whether they come and go, what the Prime Minister is saying doesn't matter, because be it there's political parties or not, the youth will always participate by creating non-governmental organizations, by creating civil societies, by protesting, by posting on YouTube, by being activists in general, be it on an individual basis, be it on a large basis. And we've been seeing this, seeing the creations of more protests through the past 2-3 years, seeing more uproar on social media, and just seeing more youth become more youth participating in economic and civic participation in general and engaging.
So when we argue that young people are disengaged and lazy, who is to blame? Is there anyone else to blame but young people? And do different young people have different reasons for not being engaged where they're not engaged?
Sometimes you see things on social media, but you won't be able to find out, you won't be able to understand what they're saying. For instance, when you are at university and you graduate, many times they look at you as a deaf student and think, after you graduated, what job can you do? You probably do this manual job, maybe they can give you as a cleaner. Because they look at us as, we're not on par as them. The reason why I think we are not participating is because we are suffering, we are left to fend for ourselves, we don't have access to tertiary institutions, and many times we want to get into a college, they provide an interpreter, you won't be able to hear what the lecturer is saying. So I think instead of us starting on those other things that on civic duties and civic engagement, we are trying to fend for ourselves, we're fighting for our own challenges, and we're trying to find solutions to. So those are the things that we are focused on. So I think government is not really giving us a chance, opportunities to be able to participate, or they are not capacitating us enough to be able to participate just like any other person. So we have so many challenges that are unmet, or so many things that are unmet, and at times you want to also study and become an engineer, but then you are told you're a deaf student, you cannot study that module or that course. So we get bored, we lose interest in many things that have to do with civic duties, and then we just end up trying to see what other means can we take on for us to continue surviving. So I think that's where the challenges are. The challenges are not given to us as youth with disabilities. So I'm advising that perhaps we can raise more awareness with government officials, that we can have meetings where we engage and then we tell them what are the challenges, so we can level the environment. Right now, we're not footing on the same level as other citizens of the country. So I think that's where I aim the question.
How does the NYC mitigate those challenges?
Okay, so firstly, let's just start off by why NYC was established as a voice for the youth. Um, um, NYC as an institution is standing there to be able to advocate for youth issues. So now, not only I'm sitting on the board as a representative of people with disability, but however, when you are on the board or when you serve on the institution, is that you serve the whole youth at large, and not only specifically them. So now when it comes to people with disability and NYC, is that I have to ensure that every program that is put out there is accessible to people with disability. And one thing NYC also did is they established an organization for people with disability, NOID, which is the Namibian Organization for Youth with Disability in Namibia. So that we have an organization that is an umbrella of all different types of disabilities, so that if a program comes out, we are able to also tell that organization and the information runs down to every member of that organization. But however, I think that hopefully in future we can have more disability organizations that are affiliated to the NYC. And the other thing is also that we should understand or how we contribute as NYC to democracy is that, let me just start off by the structure. Most or majority of the board members for National Youth Council are elected representatives as the AGM, meaning that it is the youth that actually put them there. But now, when it comes to us, I was appointed, I was not elected. This is because, you know, when it comes to democratic processes, right, majority where it goes. So now, for people with disability, the question is how do they participate and engage in different institutions and platforms? Who is their representation? Because even if I have to stand for elections, if we are talking in all honesty, how many people will see
That question dictates that then we have to categorize what informal political activity is and what formal is. And to my thinking, these words, from a constitutional perspective, for example, Article 17 speaks about peaceful political activity. Arguably, that dictates formal political activity, and it goes on to talk about every citizen having a right to be part of a political party, and therefore to be able to engage in democratic activities of the country. And there's also a specific word that it uses. It uses the word influence, to influence our systems of governance and government, for example, to hold them accountable. Now, if you look at these words, I think semantics dictate that the word peaceful really illustrates some form of formality, and the word influence also dictates some form of organization. You know, so I think from that kind of perspective, informal political activity on the part of youth would initiate or speak to something like riots and uncontrolled violent protests. I don't think that's a sustainable approach. It doesn't build anything, at least in my view, other than cause havoc and destruction. So I think there's a better way we can engage our political systems, and there's a more constructive way that we can do that. And this is through dialogues, for example. These what we have here, these kinds of discussions, panel discussions, workshops, for example, having rooms where we can caucus bread and butter issues and find solutions practically, having advocacy campaigns, for example. When our democracy and free and open internet is at stake, for example, through government policies and laws, even the mandatory SIM card registration is a very controversial issue. I mean, we have to balance interests, for example, national security and our rights to a free and open internet, for example, that stand possibly to be censored. So these kinds of activities and all other bread and butter issues in our nation have to be followed through from a very thoughtful and conscientious approach. I don't think violent outbursts and riots and just total disorganization will solve anything. I think we need some form of formality, And unfortunately, our youth of today, and me included, are very quick to act in very erratic ways that really do not build something sustainable. And I think politics, when people hear the word politics, especially on the streets, they understand it as taking things into their own hands. Well, that's okay. That's activism, right? You stand up for what is not right. Democracy dictates that you as a citizen have a right to hold those that you elected into account if something is not right. But that does not dictate, nor is there any precedent to say that you need to take things to an extent where you can actually break rules.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Wayne. And Nogi, I think just moving on to you, I saw you nodding your head a lot as Wayne was speaking. And I'm specifically interested in sort of the take that we are, there's no order and there's no effectiveness in disorganized political activity. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that, whether democracy looks a certain way, whether there's a legitimate, objectively more efficient way of engaging in the democratic process for young people, or whether that's self-defined.
I would have to add the perspective of the Trade Union Congress and international trade unions in general. They say that there is no polite way of asking your oppressor for freedom. There is no polite way to say, can you please allow us to advance our socio-economic interests or our health interests, whatever interest that is near and dear to us per our constitution. However, we cannot absolve people of the responsibility of order and structure in advancing our own interests, because at the very end of the day, whether we want to admit it or not, the responsibility lies within us, and it lies upon us, and therefore the consequences of our actions will lie upon us as well. We have seen the results of violence on our economy. We have seen the results of disorganization on our economy, particularly for young people. So I would implore every young activist to, yes, advance yourself, yes, advance the interests, but to do so with that same passion, that same vigor, that same zeal, but to do it with the understanding and the acceptance that at the very end of the day, the consequences will lie within us and upon us as young people.
Awesome. Thank you, Nonge. And William, just coming to you. So with the zeal and the vigor that Nonge mentioned, so one thing about zeal is that zeal that sort of acts as a genesis for movements, for protests, for political activity that's not institutionalized, is not sustainable. Could you speak to us a little bit about how you ensure sustainability in the work that you do for students, in the work that you do to make sure that there's a continuous engagement with the democratic process? How do you make it sustainable when zeal dies out?
Personally, Bertha, the zeal cannot die out. Where there is passion and we are young people, and we are seeing through social media, from the digital world, we have seen that there is zeal and the zeal does not die. There is passion, and I implore and I encourage my peers to continue with that same passion, because there's a fire within us, because we can see what is currently happening in our country. We can see that there's democracy in certain parts of our country only. We can see these things through the comments, through retweets, through quote tweets on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Even in the first session of this conference, we saw how the youth was engaging. Now that zeal cannot die, because without the zeal, we have seen this back in the liberation struggle when the young people, when the Nanso Keda started with that zeal. So we must continue. We must continue engaging robustly in order for change to come, because we as the youth, we form majority of the demographic of this country, of the population demographic. Therefore, we must push. We must hold our leaders accountable, robustly so. But with that, we must also know that there come consequences. But as we are also stating our rights, we must also know our constitution at the same time. We must know what our constitution says, because we cannot also claim rights that we don't know or are not informed of. So it comes back to being informed and being educated. So I believe that we must educate ourselves in order to build the zeal, run with the zeal, in order for us to achieve something in the long run.
Awesome. Thank you, William.
Radical, and sometimes you don't even know how to express, how to show that you are also affected. But many times the times that I see that government is mostly focused on urban areas, whereas a whole lot of people with disabilities that are suffering, that are really vulnerable, are in the remote areas. So it's for us now to have at work, what I try to do is raise awareness with the children, and also hoping the government can see that most of us that are in rural areas, or people that are in rural areas, are not getting any services. If you look at our country, for example, in Parliament, there is no sign of interpreting it. So for us, as deaf, the community don't even hear what the debates are happening in Parliament. And the number of interpreters that are around now are so minimal. If you use one, then when a deaf person gets sick, for instance, they are not able to go to hospital because they are not able to communicate with medical officials. So it's for us perhaps to meet the minister, perhaps to meet the president and try and raise awareness for us to feel that we are all living in the Namibian house. Government is also not forthcoming with the resources for us to be able to get what everybody else is getting. So it's my hope that in the future that government see that those with disabilities and us with disabilities should get the same resources and services.
Awesome. Thank you, Naboke. So our last question, the last question I'll pose is to Rosalind. This before we take questions from the audience. So Rosalind, I'm just wondering whether you think there's any room for creativity or sort of self-directed innovativeness around creating our own resources for participation. So something that Naboke brings out a lot is this lack of provision of resources. And I'm wondering whether in the work that you do, is there any way in which we can be crafty? And I'll be quite frank, the reason I'm asking that is because we've read, I think it was the beginning of this year or early last year, where our Honorable President has said the government is not God. And we're talking about that within the context of jobs. But right now, within the context of this conversation, it's just wondering, is there any way in which we can create our own resources to participate in the democratic process, or is that always the responsibility of government?
Firstly, can I please add to the protest question that you were talking about, whereby you say, well, did you call it robust protest? Robust protest. So now, I just want to highlight that even in our constitution, Article 17 clearly states that any Namibian citizen should participate in any political activities for as long as it is peaceful. So now when we're talking about the youth protesting about issues that affect them or they feel like their voices are not being heard on certain issues. So when we are looking at the protests that have happened in whatever particular issue that have been burning the youth, is that were those actually peaceful protests or were they harmful? Because the Constitution says the only time that, like let me say, a protest can become problematic is when people are protesting and they are armed. So it's just a question that, first of all, the Constitution encourages us to participate in peaceful political processes, which is protest. Protest, I don't think, is not peaceful unless the people that are protesting are actually armed. And getting back to your question that you asked me right now, I think that it is very important to know that each and every citizen is also responsible to contribute to their country which they are from. Yes, the government is absolutely the main, let me say, institution to promote democratic processes. But how do we engage as youth in processes? And I will refer back to that article. It continues to say that every youth can participate in any or join any political party which they wish. So now, how do you also create resources for yourself? I'm not sure if your question is also about employment or just the democratic process, because I think those are very two different things.
Just the democratic process.
How do you create resources? Number one, obviously, the civic organizations that the youth create or establish in order for their voices to be heard. That is already creating a resource whereby it's a platform